In this video, we show how to replace the engine mount on the Porsche Boxster. We show how to support the engine, how to free up space to work to smoothly get the engine mount out, how to deal with supremely annoying bolts that the 987 has that the 986 doesn't, and cover the parts and tools needed for this guide. Lastly, we make a few recommendations on what to do while you're in there to make your life easier in the future, like replacing the water pump and thermostat if you haven't already. Put the Boxster in hover mode, that is, on jack stands at all four corners. See my full-length guide for a simplified, step-by-step walkthrough on how to do this. Jack it up decently high enough to give you enough room to work with a coolant bucket and engine mount. To remove the rear underbody panel, remove a few Torx T25 screws on the sides and 10mm plastic nuts in the middle. To remove the middle underbody panels, remove the 10mm plastic nuts around their perimeter. First, the sides come off, and then they hold the middle piece in. On each of the side panels, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 10mm plastic bits, one T25 at the end. The T25 is towards the front. Once you get both sides off, the middle panel just tugs clean down off of these plastic trim studs that are left behind, exposing everything and making us admire how simple cars really are. It might be possible to remove the engine mount without disconnecting the central coolant hoses on the previous generation Boxster, the 986, but the 987 has additional bolts, including a nightmare Torx screw that you have to saw through and the hoses get in the way. It might be possible to get the engine mount out on the 987 by also flexing these hoses. However, it was already a challenge to get the engine mount out, and the hoses just add complexity. Therefore, we strongly recommend using this guide to drain the coolant. Once you've drained the coolant, we'll be able to remove these center coolant hoses that get in the way. Disconnecting the Quick Connect coolant hoses is straightforward at first. Work the retaining clips loose with a flathead screwdriver and they pop right off. The flat sides by the legs go into the grooves onto the sides. The rounded part is where you pull the clips. We then remove the plastic retaining clips. Those are quite quick and easy. If your car is more than a few years old, once those are done, it's very likely that your Quick Connect coolant hoses are not Quick Disconnect anymore. Two issues can get in the way of quickly pulling the hoses out. One is rust inside the connectors, between the male end of the hose and the female end of the hose you're disconnecting from. Shown is an extreme example of what the hoses look like when they're supremely corroded. The second reason your hose might not disconnect is the O-ring. You're essentially fighting an O-ring that's on the male end of the hose that gets stuck inside the female connector. There are three instruments of persuasion and a nuclear option when attempting to convince the rust and O-rings to unseat. First, we will show you the peaceful way to get the hoses out, and then we'll show the destructive way. The non-destructive way to get the hoses out is to use silicone lubricant to loosen the catastrophe, a flathead to pick and pry between the connectors, and your hands to periodically pull on the connector. We try not to warp the connector with the prying, being careful with how much force we apply. Try and pick in a way that doesn't warp the inner connector, but works the lips of the connectors loose. Eventually, after repeated prying, pulling, one of the connector's O-rings gives way and the connector slips out. On the other connector we had less luck. We had to pry for so long and so much that the connector was starting to warp and not look good at all. At that point we decided to go nuclear. The nuclear option is breaking the seal by bending the inserted hose inwards. We cut off the hose with a razor to make it easier, and then use pliers to do our best to bend the inner hose inwards to break the seal without bending the outer connector. Not bending the outer connector is important because if you damage the female end, you might end up having to replace more than one coolant hose. With utmost care, we cut away most of the rubber hose, and that gives us room to get to work. We use pliers to bend and pull out the derelict hose. The replacement was around $40 for this hose that connected from the middle to the thermostat. We can use a website such as Porsche Atlanta to find parts diagrams and the specific hose you cut if you need one.
And be forewarned, one of the coolant pipes did not have a good time coming out.
Ordered a replacement for 40 bucks. That's gonna be here soon. Okay, the coolant pipe's out of the way. The bolts are much more exposed. So we're gonna first support the engine using a jack, mainly on this square piece. On the 987, there are 2 nuts and studs on the left and 2 nuts and studs on the right. They frequently come out together while you're turning the nuts. They're frequently covered with rubber covers. This is what they look like without the rubber covers. Remove the 2 from both sides. These hold the whole engine and engine mount assembly to the car, to the chassis. Be sure the engine is firmly supported before you completely remove these. Grab a 15. Now we grab 15 millimeters and start on the 4 studs. And if the stud comes out for you, that's okay. If the stud comes out, that's even better. And we remove the studs at the end if they don't come out, because that gives us more room to work with. While you're working in there, hop back and make sure the jack is well adjusted. So as you saw, my engine dropped a little regardless. So I quickly jacked it up extra. You have to go back and jack it up as it's coming off of the last 2 studs here. And because of the weight, actually the 2 nuts came off the thing. Off the studs, which is fine. Just make sure the studs on the outsides are tight. Now we're gonna move on to the 4 bolts exposed here. On the 986 Boxster up until 1998, the engine mount had 3 bolts. The mount has gone through a few redesigns, and if yours is after 1998, then you likely have 4 bolts. Sometimes, the mount is also attached with a Torx screw that I like to call the FU Torx screw by Porsche 2 DIYers, because it's a nightmare to get out without dropping the engine. They most likely install it with the engine out because there's no way to even get it in with the engine in. And it's a good thing that we tune into these videos because we include a solution here. First, we crack the 2 bottom bolts loose.
I was able to get this far top bolt, not too bad. Since I removed my pipes, I can reach around here and hold this in place. And then with the other hand, that's my camera hand, imagine my left hand placed on the open end of the 15 millimeter. And then I push up and I broke it loose and it moves like so. With the top one on the left side.
Enjoy a quick montage of me removing that bolt here. As you can see, you have to use a wrench and make sure it's planted with your other hand, sticking it through where ordinarily the coolant hoses would have been.
You'll observe that the engine mount is already wiggly. I haven't even removed all the bolts yet. It's only the bottom 2 do you have to entirely remove. It'll come out when the engine is lowered. The top one has a groove at the top. On the right side if you're looking at the back. This one has a groove at the top. The other one that I loosened on the other side has a groove on the side. So I didn't have to loosen it as far as I did. So I could have even loosened it less. So when I loosen this bolt, the engine mount is going to want to come out. So it's just going to pivot down off of the grooved one up here and pivot sideways off of this one. I'll set the camera up in a time lapse. And also, you can reach this bolt because since we removed the coolant pipes, there's space for a socket here. So I'm going to try and fit a socket through the central vent opening area here right now. These are 15s, okay. Can fit through here. Voila! And it fits. This socket extension is too long, but a short extension with a long 15. All right. So I will just boom, I have a socket. I'm gonna break it loose. Careful not to cut yourself on the coolant pipe. Oh, just is a little bit loosened because now it should slide off of all the bolts. Now we should loosen this jack a little, and the engine mount should come off. All right, here it goes. Notice how I'm getting not under the engine in case it falls. So it looks like there's a 5th point of attachment here at the bottom in addition to this. So I'm checking this Torx screw. And yes, upon zooming in, reveals that there's indeed a screw in here. A 5th one hiding between the mount, which is loose, and this 5th attachment point. So I need to somehow wiggle something in between these two to get this Torx out somehow. Oh, wow. How do I do that? It's a good question. After experimenting to no avail, what I've come up with thus far is using a T30 tip to a regular drill bit 6-side extension to an adapter that converts hex shank to mini hex, from mini hex to regular hex. You put your hand through these coolant pipes here, and you do your best to bend this away, and it barely fits in there. You can see it on the T30. There's no space there. No, it's none whatsoever. So now we're going to try to do it that way. Between the coolant pipes. Because there's more room farther away from the coolant pipes. All the way out here to give me room to work on this. And it broke loose. It somehow broke loose. I can't believe it. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't removed the coolant pipes. For those wondering, this is the bolt that is troubling us. It doesn't let it completely out and doesn't let this pivot off of those upper bolts. But this hat is barely not letting this go through here. Just barely, and forcing it doesn't work.
What ensued is probably one of the most grueling hours I've ever had to do during doing DIY car stuff, because the blood is draining from your arms as you're doing this. The screw/bolt is too slippery when you're hacksawing it, so you have to hold it with pliers with one hand, while with another, hacksaw it. This takes forever. The screw is slipping out of your pliers all the time, so you have to reset your position, and I used tape on the pliers to hold it a little better.
I spent about an hour and a half, but I got it using a metal hacksaw blade. And the bolt finally came out. So now I'm looking at the top pivot so I can top pivot. My side pivot, that side, and it should come out. Easy. Detaching the old mount is straightforward. Ignore the old cut bolt inside the engine for now. 15 on both sides. Once you break it loose, slide bolt comes out. You have victory. These are your old mounts. Remember how it goes. This is how long that bolt is, by the way, so good luck getting that out. We swap over the thing to the new mount, and as you can see, it is a point of contention which way you put the foam and which way you put the rubber on these new replacement ones on the 987. Some people say that the Pelican parts, which currently, as you know, I'm the biggest fan of Pelican, says the rubber goes inwards towards here, which makes sense because the central piece is going to shake and deteriorate, and then the foam is just pressed against the outsides. Another very helpful, kind man on a forum wrote that the foam goes inside, this middle piece is going to move and stuff. So, and I think this is just the side that presses against the outer metal. But the body, the elves. This is slide it in and reinsert the bolts. And thanks to Aaron at Help Me DIY. I'm watching his videos as inspiration. Credit to the OG. He says it's 32 foot-pounds, so I am trusting Boxster Jesus. There we go.
For the studs that did come out, we're going to remove the nuts that are on them.
Big ones are 15. Now we can free these studs. The outside one is 15 and the inside one. So we have 9/32 inside of here. And this guy. See how this goes. Try stepping on it, using the power of the primate within. Oh, and that goes super easy.
Okay, the two nuts that were stuck on the studs have been removed. Tighten the other two studs in the car using the 9/32. We're gonna position the new motor mount in.
You do not want your face under all these metal flakes. At the back, it goes sideways, and then at the top, it just presses on. So we're putting this, leveraging it on like this, onto the half removed bolt. So I'm feeling around. Giving myself a bit more room to play here with the top bolt. So what's the issue? The issue is that it needs a little bit of lowering for this to fit if we don't want to completely. Something in the middle isn't letting it in, just by a hair though. So I'm going to lower the engine by a hair. We're doing what I said shouldn't do, which is getting under the engine. So first I'm going to try this without being situated under the engine. This should. Aha! And it locks on. So we just need a clearance. Now we hand tighten these to avoid any slippage. And while we can get away with hand tightening it, we should, because these are a bear to get to with tools. With the two top bolts situated, we should insert these two long bolts while they fit and tighten them down to 32, the number I last heard. Right, because these were a bear and we're also not fitting. So we need to go even lower. Comfortably low is how I would describe the last bolt. Do that, it goes back in. We reinstall these with 16s. And torque the other two at the top as well. Obviously a torque wrench won't fit unless you do some black magic trickery with a lot of extensions through the coolant pipe area. Lift until it starts lifting the car up. Then you know the engine is pressed up against the chassis. Then go get your 7mm or 9/32. If you're feeling metric or imperial that day. Pressing up a little against it. No big deal, luckily. Give yourself a pat on the back because you are almost done. These are We reinstall our 15s. And all 4 of them get to the middle and then not seize, but have resistance that makes me nervous. So we go by hand the rest of the way. So we can feel if we're gonna mess it up. You want to do them evenly rather than one side at once, so that you don't accidentally support the whole weight of an engine on one nut at once. Right, we got it up against the chassis. Got him. Got him. Congratulations. Assuming you tore down the ones at the top, you just swapped your engine mount. Your 987. Take the jack down and give yourself a massive pat on the back and reinstall the coolant pipes.
At this point, you can do a final visual inspection to make sure everything is connected, and if you've done everything right, we can remove the jack. While we have the coolant drained, it's a good time to replace the water pump and thermostat while you're in there. That guide is also available on this channel and is linked in the description.
Now, there was no way in heck I was removing this pipe without destroying it. Before we reinstall, we need to transfer over the metal clip. Alright, Joe almost forgot to do just now. So let's install it here first. Approximately where it goes. And then this little notch aligns with this little notch here. Oh, that clips right in. That was super simple. And to make sure, this is just, it's back a little, the notches go back. Slowly encouraging this metal back into where it belongs.
And we do the same for the other connector, which we kind of victimized. This outer lip is not super important since the actual O-ring on the inside is what makes the seal. However, preserving the general shape of the coolant pipes is never a bad idea in my book. If the 2 coolant hose lips are aligned, there's less chance of gunk getting in as well.
There we go. And then before installing this, you also want to clip on this plastic. It goes on a metal bracket that's hidden behind here, and it goes like so. Slides on. I like new coolant hoses. They're soft and docile and fresh. And for my next trick, just replace the thing that goes onto this to hold the pipe on. Don't break that. And congratulations, you got in the clip on. Likewise. Feel around because there's a lip, and you want the hose to be over the lip, and you want it clamped after the lip. And before I forget, you also want to reinstall the metal clip that goes onto this with the legs facing away from the connection so that this gets held in together. So if it doesn't perfectly go in, you might need to encourage it a little.
Use this guide, available on the channel and linked in the description, to fill the coolant and bleed the air from the system. The Boxster feels like a much newer vehicle. The vibrations and rumblings from the engine are significantly cut down, in a good way. This is what it must have felt like when it rolled right off the assembly line. Despite it being a little challenging and requiring draining the coolant and hacksawing through a bolt, I'm really glad I invested the money, time, and effort in doing this. Thanks for watching.